The August heat in the Bitterroot Valley didn't break until well past sundown, and even then it only eased, it never truly left. Nora Callahan stood in the open door of the barn at 4:30 in the afternoon, a fistful of fresh-cut hay in her hands, her linen shirt damp at the collar. The chestnut mare, Rosie, pressed her wide nose forward and lipped the hay from Nora's palm with the patience of an old friendship. Outside, the mountains stood blue and indifferent in the distance. The smell of pine resin drifted down from the high timber, mixing with the sweet rot of turned earth from the vegetable garden her mother had started and Nora had kept going alone for 2 years now. She was 24. She ran 40 acres by herself, or near enough. Hired a man named Cutter for spring branding and fall harvest, but the rest of the year the work was hers, the fence lines, the chickens, the root cellar, the accounts kept in a ledger her father had left behind with his neat, careful handwriting still filling the first 30 pages. She didn't mind the solitude. She had minded, once. Now it simply was. She heard the wagon before she saw it, the familiar creak of iron wheels on the dry track, the particular rhythm of a horse she knew as well as her own. Thomas Hale was coming up the road. She had known Thomas Hale for going on 3 years, ever since he'd bought the dryer place 2 miles east and spent the better part of a summer fixing what the dryers had let fall apart. He'd introduced himself properly, hat in hand, honest face, a firm handshake, and asked if he might run a few head of cattle across the northwest corner of her land to reach the creek in dry season. She'd said yes, on the condition he repair the section of fence his cattle would cross. He'd repaired twice as much as she'd asked. That was the kind of man he was. He pulled the wagon to a stop at the fence post and climbed down with the easy movement of a man who'd been doing it his whole life. He was carrying a bucket, same as the last 2 Wednesdays. He'd been helping her patch the irrigation ditch that fed her kitchen garden, a problem she'd mentioned once in passing at the Stevensville Mercantile, and he'd simply shown up the following Wednesday with tools. "Afternoon," he said. "Afternoon," she said back. He set the bucket down and looked at Rosie, who had turned her head to watch him with mild interest. "She's filling out nicely. Good grass this year." Nora tucked a loose piece of hair behind her ear. "Before you get started on that ditch, there's cold water in the kitchen if you want it." He looked like he was about to decline, he often did, out of some notion of not imposing, then nodded. "Appreciate it." They walked together across the yard the way they always did, easy, unhurried, the kind of comfortable that takes time to grow and almost never announces itself. That was the thing about Thomas Hale. He never announced himself. He simply appeared, and the work got done, and then he was gone again. She had stopped, somewhere in the past year, pretending that she didn't watch the road on Wednesdays. He said it while they were standing at the kitchen table, her pouring water from the ceramic pitcher and him looking out the window at the garden with his arms folded, the way a man does when he's thinking about something practical. "You know, Nora," he said, in the easy tone he used for most things, "the way you work this place alone, at this rate you'll never get married. What man be willing to come second to 40 acres and a stubborn mare?" He laughed when he said it. A comfortable laugh. The laugh of a man who thinks he said something harmless. She set the pitcher down. She didn't slam it. She set it down with complete control, and that was somehow worse. She turned and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, not anger exactly, but something that had been carefully arranged over something much older and much more tender. "Only if you ask me," she said quietly. And then she walked out the back door. He stood in her kitchen for a long moment, the joke still dissolving in the air around him. The trouble was this: Thomas Hale had spent 3 years telling himself that a woman like Nora Callahan deserved better than a man who'd come to Montana with $60 and a second-hand saddle. He'd built that belief into something useful. It let him show up every Wednesday, let him repair her fence and work her ditch and hand her a cup of coffee at the mercantile counter without it costing him anything. It was a comfortable kind of cowardice. He had not understood until that exact moment that she had seen through every bit of it. He walked outside. She was gone, back into the barn, the door pulled nearly shut. He picked up his bucket. He did not go after her that day. He didn't come the following Wednesday. Nora told herself she hadn't expected him to. She worked the ditch herself, which was hard going in the August heat, and she finished it in 2 days and was satisfied, and that was that. He came on a Thursday, 2 weeks later, at a decent working hour, and she was in the yard splitting kindling when he rode up. He didn't bring the wagon this time. Just himself and his horse and a folded piece of oilskin across the saddle. He stopped at the gate. She kept splitting. "I brought that oilskin you asked about last spring," he said. "For the root cellar seam." She had indeed asked about it last spring. She had mostly forgotten. "Leave it at the post," she said. "I'll get it later." He left it. He didn't go. She split 3 more pieces of kindling, aware of his horse shifting in the heat, aware of him sitting still in the saddle the way a man sits when he's decided to say something and is waiting to feel ready. "I wasn't laughing at you," he said finally. "I know what you were doing," she said. "I don't think you do." She looked up then. He had his hat in his hands, which he almost never did. Thomas Hale was not a hat-in-hands kind of man. His expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. "I was laughing," he said slowly, "because I was afraid." "That's a poor excuse." "I know that." She looked at him for a long time. "There's cold water inside," she said. He tied his horse at the post and came through the gate. They sat at her kitchen table and she poured 2 cups of water and he told her, plainly, without decoration, that he had come to Montana broke and stubborn and had not thought himself a man with much to offer. He told her that watching her work this land alone had been the most quietly humbling thing he'd witnessed in his life. He did not say he loved her. He did not say anything so large or so sudden. He said only that he had been a coward, and that he was sorry for the joke. She listened to all of it. When he was done she refilled his cup, and she told him about the ledger, her father's handwriting in the first 30 pages, her own filling the rest. She told him about the winter of 1880, when she'd lost 4 cattle to a hard freeze and had sat at this same table and decided she would not leave. She told him nothing she hadn't earned the right to say. He listened to all of it. When he left, he paused at the gate and looked back at her standing on the porch. "Same time next Thursday?" he asked. "The ditch is already fixed," she said. "I know," he said. She let the silence sit a moment. "Same time next Thursday," she said. September came in with a cold wind off the Bitterroot Range and a week of hard rain that turned the roads to mud and flattened half the corn she had left standing. She spent 2 days in the wet pulling stalks and salvaging what she could, and on the second day she slipped in the mud near the fence line and twisted her ankle badly enough that she had to half crawl back to the house using a fence post for a crutch. She didn't send word. It didn't occur to her to send word. She had been managing on her own for long enough that the idea of asking for help arrived about 3 steps behind the injury. Thomas found out from Cutter, who had stopped by to check on the place and ridden back to his own camp talking about it at the post in Stevensville. He appeared the next morning before the sun was fully up, which was unlike him. He was always careful about proper hours. She heard his horse and came to the door, one hand on the frame to take the weight off her wrapped ankle, and he looked at her from the yard with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite fear but was very clearly something it had cost him to contain on the ride over. "Why didn't you send word?" he asked. "I've had worse," she said. "That is not an answer." She opened her mouth to say something practical, something about the corn, about how she'd managed the crutch fine, about not needing to trouble him, and instead what came out was, "I didn't think I should." He came up the porch steps. He stood close enough that she could see the mud on his boots from a fast ride and the rain still on his jacket collar. "Nora," he said, and the way he said her name was different from every time before. It wasn't the name of a neighbor or a friend or a woman he admired at a careful distance. It was the name of someone he had been afraid to claim. "I need you to hear something." "I'm listening," she said. "I am not a man of great means. I have 120 acres that I am still paying on, 12 head of cattle, and a house that needs a new roof before winter." He paused. "But I am steady. And I would spend every day I have left proving that to you, if you'll let me." She looked at him. The wind moved through the yard. Somewhere, one of the barn cats knocked something over and disappeared into the hay. "You still owe me a proper question," she said. And Thomas Hale, who had been afraid for 3 long years, took a breath and asked it. They did not rush anything. He finished the roof on his own house first, because a man ought to have his own affairs in order. She let the ankle heal, which took the better part of October, and she used the time to write to her mother's sister in Missoula and to make 2 entries in the ledger, one practical, one that she would have been embarrassed to explain to anyone else. They were married on the 2nd Saturday of November, in the parlor of the Methodist Church in Stevensville, with Cutter as witness and the minister's wife playing a hymn on a piano that was missing 2 keys. The celebration afterward was modest: a meal at the hotel, strong coffee, a slice of cake. That evening they drove back to her homestead. They had decided that together, that her 40 acres and his 120 would be run together, but that they would live in her house the first winter because his roof, new as it was, still needed a season to settle. She stood at the barn door one last time as herself alone, not for long, only a moment, and Rosie pressed forward and lifted her coat. "I know," Nora said to the horse. Thomas came and stood beside her. He didn't speak. He wasn't a man who filled silence with words, which had been, if she was honest, one of the first things she had noticed about him. She handed him half the hay. He fed it to the mare, and Rosie accepted it from his hand as calmly as if she'd always known he would be there. They latched the barn and walked back through the cold Montana dark toward the lit window of the house, their boots crunching the first frost of the season, the mountains invisible but present in the black distance. She had not built this life to give it away. She had built it until someone came who was worth building beside.